Hi, folks. Good afternoon. Just gone tick past midday, so we can say that. I've just seeing the people trickle through the doors. I always think being a virtual thing, people should just be able to come in like that, but maybe it's just a sort of nostalgic feature of Zoom that they let people in one at a time. As ever, please do drop a message in the chat. Don't forget to just above where you type your message, click the drop down above to and change it from hosts and panelists to everyone so we can all see. I'll type it in there as well. Hello for everyone just arriving. See those numbers trickling in. Slightly earlier schedule for today, so I'm expecting a different crowd, but also I can already see some familiar names popping up. Yeah, okay, we've got both ends of the country already. We've got Highlands down to Dorset. I'll give it a couple more minutes before I start my spiel, whilst everyone's just coming in. Okay, we're seeing some stabilization in numbers, so I'll start talking. If people turn up 2 minutes late, they might miss me, but they won't miss Lisa. So that's the main thing. So listen, welcome to today's first talk of the day, the second weekend of the festival. We're in for a real treat today. We've got Lisa Lucas, who cycled all the way across America on the Transamerica route back in 2004, way before it was cool. I hope you're enjoying it so far. If you've been to talks already, and if you've not, then welcome aboard. It's great to have you here. As you probably have heard and seen before, it's a free event. It's all organised by my wife, Laura, with a bit of help from her friends. But if you'd like to donate, that'd be fantastic. The suggested donation is £5 for a talk or £20 for the whole week, and that's just for the whole household. But anything you can afford is great, and if you can't, it doesn't matter. We just want it to be accessible and want to share all these stories and hear these great tales from around the world of all the trips people have been up to. I've already mentioned before in the chat box, if you want to talk to people, just above where you type, do the drop down where it says to everyone and switch it to hosts and panelists and change it to everyone. And as with every, this is a webinar, so you can't turn your camera on and you can't talk, but do send chat messages amongst yourselves. And if you've got questions for Lisa, either throughout the talk or towards the end, then use the little Q&A button that's probably at the bottom of your screen, type those, and then at the end of Lisa's talk, there'll be a chance for some Q&A. But I think that is more than enough from me. The only other thing I'll add is that we record these sessions. So if your internet drops or you're interrupted by a child or a dog or some emergency happens or your friends can't make it, then don't worry. It's recorded and it'll be on YouTube in the next day or so. And that's the same for most talks. You can get them all from our website and our YouTube channel. So without further ado, I'm turning myself off, handing over to speaker for the day. Lisa, over to you.
Thank you, Tim. Hello out there. Nice to spend a little bit of time with you this afternoon. My name is Lisa Lucas, and I'm going to be talking to you about the Transamerica route, and this route in 2004. And I suspect it's a little bit of a strange talk. I was just mentioning to Tim because a lot of cycle tourists like to trailblaze, and you love looking at the map and kind of making your own route. And then when you actually do it, sometimes it's glorious and sometimes it's terribly wrong and you get stuck on highways. And so this is a little bit of a different talk about a different flavor trip that actually has a route. It's a route with history, but I'll talk about the advantages of doing something like this. It's not for every trip, but it does have its place. First, a little bit about me. And so I'm obviously an American. I'm a cyclist. I own a marketing company and live in London with my family. I have a two daughters, a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. And something I'm really passionate about as a cycle tourist is teaching them how to become, to love cycle touring. And so I write a blog about just that, taking your kids on the adventure. So not thinking about going to Disney World and Legoland, but how do you have the adventure that you had before you had kids, and bring them along with you. And so this picture over on the left side is me at the end of the trip. This is Big Sur in California. In 2004, I was just a wee baby there. And then this is me now, hopefully not oh so different in certain ways, at least. Right. And so the Transamerica trip, why do you want to bike across America? I suspect more than most countries, America is profiled in film and books, and you have this idea of the American dream. There's all these myths attached to it. It's the country of big skies and open roads and pioneers and revolutionaries and prairies. And you have this idea of what America is going to be like. And I think a lot of people want to go and chase that down. You have the beat poets, and I have a Jack Kerouac quote on here: "Nothing behind me, everything ahead of me, as is ever so on the road." And so I think a lot of people have these fantasies on the road and what that's going to be like. I went on this route because it was the closest big adventure for me. I went to the University of Virginia and graduated in 2004. And so this was a celebration trip. And I went with my college ex-boyfriend. We planned the trip when we were dating and broke up, but still wanted to do the trip together. And so we'll talk about that. It's an interesting dynamic for sure. But yeah, America, Route 66 gets all the glory of going across America. But I think Route 76, which is the bike route, is obviously the best way to see America. And so I will talk to you a little bit about the trip. And so this is the team. This is the original team. This is me, Kyle. We're looking really, really tough, flexing here. This is in one of the rougher parts of the trip in Kentucky, where we really felt like we needed to get some tattoos. So these are some stick-on tattoos, and we want to look really tough and rough to keep up with the crowds there. And then we ended up, just by chance, meeting these two jokers. I'll talk about this. The best part about going on an actual route is that you run into more cycle tourists than you would if you're just plotting it out and going across the country on your own. And you get really excited whenever you see anyone on a bike with the big pack on the back. And so you can imagine how excited we were when we rolled into camp late, and at this camp, nobody else was there. It was just like a picnic table and some field by a little creek. They were sitting down there with their camping stove out, making some ramen and tuna for dinner. And we pulled up and we were just ecstatic. And they had just graduated and were getting ready to do the same route. And we ended up biking all the way to the Pacific Ocean with these strangers. Yeah, I mean, it was an amazing dynamic, because we were all, we were kids, and I look at these, 20-year-old kids, and we were just up for anything. And it's funny, I really remember their faces, but if you're really into cycling, you really remember people's legs. So I can almost imagine John's kind of slightly bowed, sinewy legs, and Kyle's really muscular thighs and calves. And yeah, I think that you just, when I was putting together this talk, I was really reminded of all the moments of what it's like to know somebody when they're a kid, and then to, you know, just lose touch with people and to see these kids that are now adults. It's yeah, it really, it's very moving. And so part of this is just reflecting on kind of your first big bike trip and thinking about those people that were really important in that trip. So I'll talk a little bit about the route now. And so Adventure Cycling is the company that actually puts together these routes. And so the genesis is a couple in the early 70s biking from Alaska down to Argentina. And the American Bicentennial was coming up in 1976. And so they wanted to plan a route across America to celebrate that. And so the Bicentennial, if you don't know, is when America celebrates the 200 years since the American Revolution. And so since they got the Brits out of there, and they called this the Bikecentennial. And that summer, 4,000 cyclists from all 50 states and a number of countries biked across America. And so they separated them out in chunks of 10 and 12, and they had, this is a picture of, I think, the beginning of the ride, but it definitely wasn't this many people. And you can see a few helmets, but when I read the accounts of this trip in 76, there were not a lot of helmets, and all the gear was just, you know, really like bottom rung. There's no carbon fiber there. I'll tell you that. Now, every year, around 3,000 riders go across America on these routes. And so since building this route called Bike Route 76, that I'll take you through and on the next slide, they've done a number of routes, but they have this classic route across the center of America. It's a little circuitous. And then they have a northern route and also a southern route. And so across all three of those routes, there are 3,000 riders a year. But what I will say is that you don't see that many people. So it doesn't feel crowded at all, but you do see more, you run into more riders than you might if you were just plodding your own way. Okay, so this is the route. It starts in Yorktown, Virginia. And then climbs through the Appalachians. We actually started in Charlottesville because it goes right through our college town. And so we picked it up there. And then it goes down into Kentucky and then up and just touches Illinois through Missouri, Kansas. And then it climbs up to Colorado, through Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and Oregon. And you can go up to Astoria, which is that northern point on the orange, or we finished in Florence, which is the point further south. And then Kyle and I, we had always planned to bike down to LA after that. And so this entire route across America is 4,262 miles. And then it's another 1,000, basically down to LA. And so we biked down to San Francisco. A lot of it was on Route 1, a little bit dangerous. And we waited for a friend in San Francisco, and then we went down to LA. And then we only had a certain amount of budget for the trip. And so we decided we were going to take the Amtrak train back across to go east. We thought then we would do a full loop. And so we boxed our bikes and then got on the Amtrak in LA going to New Orleans and then up to Virginia. The whole ride was supposed to take 48 hours. And at one point, I think somewhere in Texas, we were about 24 hours late. And so that's Amtrak for you. Never before or since have I been on a train that was 24 hours late, but it happens in America. Anyway, so that is the total loop that we did that summer. And it took about 3 months. Really, we did the Transamerica in 6 weeks. We were really, really cruising, lots of high mileage days. And then we took another 6 weeks just to bounce down California. And we're doing a lot of beach time and I don't know, clearly messing around and not doing much, because that 6 weeks is a long time to take on that bit. So what does adventure cycling actually do? They are based in Missoula, Montana, and they produce these maps. And so you can see they have a lot of detail. They pinpoint where there are some good campsites nearby. They, obviously they show the elevation. And so you can get a sense of what your day is going to be like, and maybe plan a bit, especially when you're biking through the Midwest, like around Missouri and Kansas. The winds are, they can really, the headwinds can get really bad. And so the prevailing winds actually go east. And so a lot of people, they think you don't want to go, you don't want to bike west because of the headwinds. But I think, if you can get up really early, then you can get around that. But this really helps for planning out your day. And it's certainly a lot more information than if you just have a regular map and are trying to cross-reference it with your smartphone. What is nice about, and also, so you can buy these maps. I think even with a smartphone, if you wanted to do this route, I would buy them. It's about 200 all in. There's 12 separate stages of the maps. And the advantage of doing a route like this is that you have these clear maps to follow. So it's a good route if you want to just go and see America and you don't want to be as fussed about, oh gosh, like what's the best way to, get across the desert. But it's, so you're not trailblazing or anything like that. But the good thing about this route is also, if you're on a budget, they actually are really used to cyclists coming through. And there are lots of town rec centers and pools that you can, they give you the number to call the police when you're there, and you can let them know that you're a cyclist and you're staying in the town park. And so actually about 25% of our accommodation ended up being at these free places to stay that they kind of identify along the route. And people are nice to you because they're expecting to see you. They're not, sure, you get the people that are like, oh, what are you doing that for? Why don't you strap a motor to that thing? Of course that happens, but still there's a more predictable sense of like cyclists coming through these towns. And so actually there are lots of kind of freebies and it's, they're good at catering to the cyclists. And I loved meeting lots of other riders as we went through. Okay, so now I'll just start going through what the terrain is like in each, like as you go across and tell some stories of the road. But yeah, we started out in Virginia. Right around the Blue Ridge Parkway. That's where Charlottesville is. It's Monticello. It's Thomas Jefferson's home. And it's really not a great place to start, honestly, because it is right, like as you directly go into the Appalachian Mountains. And people will look at America and they'll say, oh, with the big wilderness and the big, like mountains are out west. But honestly, they're very graded out there. And in the east, the Appalachians and the Ozarks, they're short, steep little hills that will just, they'll just kill you, honestly. And so if you start, we did lots of training before this ride, and, as in we were like going and doing shorter rides. And so we weren't out of shape, but I think that I would definitely start in Yorktown and be prepared for the Appalachians. Also, it's interesting if you're a hiker, you intersect the Appalachian Trail at Damascus, which can, be a really nice place to meet up with people that are on a different adventure. Usually people are coming through there. Well, yeah, it depends when you start. I would recommend starting this in May, and so you don't get the heat out east. the August, and August, like it's really, really humid on the East Coast. In the West, it's much drier. And so if you had the option to plan, starting around May is really good. And then, so you'll intersect with a lot of through hikers going through the Appalachian Trail in Damascus. And so like around the Brake State Park, you end up crossing over into Kentucky. And this is where our picture of being very tough is from, because it is a really rough and tumble little area, because there are all kinds, there's like it's a lot of rural poverty, and there are sofas out front, and there are packs of dogs chasing you, and there are people with real shotguns. And yeah, so we felt like we really needed to dial up the toughness as we were going through there. And luckily, this is also where we had our big find in meeting John and Stern. I think this is the night that we actually met them, and they had the exact same Whisper Light International stove. So it was a match made in heaven. But yeah, we didn't know that we were going to keep cycling with them. And so this is a real celebration night. Just a stop along the way, very classic Americana, the Coca-Cola sign, the Delarict building. Lots of stops like this, just yeah, like having the snacks. John and Stern actually took the bob trailers all the way through. We did panniers. I always think panniers are the best way, because honestly, the more wheels you have, the more punctures you're bound to get. But I know, yeah, I'm always interested in whether people prefer the bob trailer or the panniers. You just touch Illinois on this route. And this is, you cross the Ohio and the Mississippi. And so if you've ever read Huck Finn, that all of that book really takes place along the Mississippi River. It's this big classic river that runs north-south. And this is the home of Popeye, the comics character. I guess Sager grew up right around there, and this Popeye statue looks right out at the Mississippi. And so we didn't find, you always talk about the biggest ball of string. That's what you see when you cross America. We didn't find the biggest ball of string, but we did, something like that, the big classic Popeye statues, the claim to fame. Swimming holes. We did lots of town pools. We didn't do as much wild swimming as we probably should have, but had to cool off. I mean, it's really, it's much hotter than it is in the UK, obviously. My children, even though my husband and I are both American, my children were born here, and they're little delicate English roses, and their span of tolerance around the heat is maybe about like 10 degrees. And it's really, really hot in America. And so especially the East Coast, the humidity will really kill you. And so you have to be prepared for that and make sure that you have the tolerance, and that of course you're hydrating quite a bit. But this is us in Missouri. And so this is an example of like one of the town parks where you could just call up, and you could just, they welcome cyclists camping out on the lawn there. And then also, we had at least some nights where it was so hot, we just sleep on the picnic tables. It did feel, at that point, at least, it felt safe. I mean, I know you see all the stories about America. It can be a scary place, but we didn't have any problems. I mean, when I told my grandfather I was going to take this trip, he was like, "Well, you should get a big old chain and tie it around your bike, and so when people come at you, you could just swing at them." I don't know. Anyway, no scenario actually happened where I might be swinging some chain at somebody that was going to come and get me. I think we had like apple cores thrown at us and things like that. I mean, people hate cyclists, you know, everywhere you go. So you get some hate, but actually I felt really, really safe. We ran into, you know, you have some strange cycle tourists that might be, I don't know, just living on the road forever. But you know, so you just, and if you're sleeping next to them, you might check them out a little bit. But I never felt unsafe on this route, and I don't know if that's different now. And so after you go through the Ozarks in Missouri, you head into Kansas, and I just really think that this is the bread and butter of the trip. I mean, not everyone loves long cycling days, but I think that if you're going to do this, that's probably what you love. You love climbing, you know, you love climbing the mountain, and you love high mileage days. You like the pain is like part of the fun. And so we did really, really high mileage days, and there's not much in Kansas. A lot of farms. I think there are at least, well, there were many days that you could smell manure the whole way through. And you do have the prevailing winds that really affect you there. And so we would wake up at like 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning and do early mileage against the wind. And that usually helped quite a bit. But yeah, there's not much there. This is the stretch where you have the longest distance between services. And so I think there's about a 70-mile stretch where there's nothing, no water, just nothing. And so you have to plan for that. And so actually having the maps really helps with knowing where those are. And there's, you know, they tell you what's ahead. And so there's some grandma's pie shop. I think we were looking forward for 2 days to get to. And so it says a lot about what's in Kansas. But I was reminded that actually one of the best parts, you know, of going across, you know, some sort of route is meeting a lot of the cyclists. And right in Kansas, we actually met this guy that was headed east, a man, and he was lovely, and he's like, oh yeah, I live out in Santa Barbara. And Kyle and I said, yeah, we're going to Santa Barbara. And he was so sweet, and he wrote his phone number on our map, and he said, call me when you get there, and you can, you know, sleep over at my house. And so, you know what, we called him up when we got to Santa Barbara, and we said, hey, whatever his name was, you know, we're here. And you know what, he pulled it through on it. He let us sleep. I mean, he had like a wife, family. And so I'm sure she was like, why did you let these 20-year-olds, you know, anyway, they were all very nice, and they made us banana and chocolate chip pancakes. And, you know, it just made America feel, you know, so much smaller when you have somebody's like phone number scrawled down from Kansas. And they follow through on their promise to let you sleep over, you know, by the time you get to California. And so the weather can be an issue, you know, if you you know, tornadoes do happen, obviously, if you've ever seen The Wizard of Oz. But like, this is a shelf cloud. We didn't experience any tornadoes, but I think that you do have to be prepared for that kind of weather as you're going through. This was one of the nights that we were wild camping. And so when you're along this route, there are lots of flags about where to stay. But of course, anytime you're touring, that, you know, you end up going faster or slower, and having to wild camp. I would really, really caution against wild camping in America, because people take trespassing really seriously, and they have guns. And so don't be, you know, like, oh, I'll just wild camp on somebody's field, because you don't really know how they're going to react. And so I would be more cautious there than I would be certainly in any place in Europe. But we would turn up in a place and not know where we were going to sleep. At least a quarter of the time. And this is one of those nights. And our buddy John, who's always saying, okay, nowhere to sleep. This is a night where we're going to have to get weird. And I always love that because I think that, I don't know, part of the fun is kind of not knowing where you're going to sleep that night. Anyway, this is really, I guess it's a picnic, like rec center type thing. It was, you know, disused. And this is the night that I think we ended up sleeping with this homeless man in there. Maybe, I mean, you know, I'm a little bit more cautious traveling as a single woman around the world. But I was with these boys, and so we ended up, just staying there. I think the guy actually ended up peeing on somebody's bag. It was a little bit of a a moment, but yeah, I mean, sometimes the takeaway is sometimes you just have to get weird. And this is us also going around banging on doors, trying to figure out where we're going to stay. Right after we passed into Colorado, this is a rodeo. We couldn't find anywhere to stay. Sometimes we would just like actually knock on like neighborhood doors. I would go first because, you know, you send the girl, she'll disarm anyone. But this night we ended up sleeping in the rodeo where there are all these horses just wandering around. Luckily, none of them stepped on our tents. But, you know, as soon as you cross the border from Kansas into Colorado, really the landscape dramatically changes, which is really exciting. And so I was in my early 20s when I did this trip, and I had gone to Europe, but I had never been west of Chicago when I started this ride. And so what was really exciting is that every single state was the first time I had been that far west. And so by the time you get to Colorado, you know, you've seen kind of all these films with, you know, the Rocky Mountains. And so, yeah, it's incredibly exciting to finally get to a place where there's desert scrub and you start seeing the Rockies, and you have to start preparing instead of for the high winds, but for the altitude change. And so you do have to, you know, acclimatize, you know, relatively slowly. We didn't have any problems, but you go over Hoosier Pass in Colorado. That's the highest point this route takes, and then you drop into Breckenridge, which is sort of a ski town out there. Very fancy ski town, and actually John would always be like, another tourist trap whenever we went to these nice touristy towns. He'd be like, another overpriced tourist trap. Yeah. And actually Kyle and I were like, oh, but this is kind of nice. that was one thing. We were on a budget, but they were on a very, very strict budget. And so although we did a lot of cycling together, there was always this tension about, you know, the amount of money we were spending. I mean, we were going to grocery stores and we would just be like eating, you know, peanut butter on bagels outside grocery stores, but, you know, there's spending money. And so, yeah. And so anyway, that ended up being a problem later in the trip. Anyway, that's me, impossibly young. What a baby. Yeah, and so this is us climbing up into Wyoming. And so I suppose I should explain. And so on the map, you can see that you go almost directly west out to Kansas, and then you just pop up to Colorado and Wyoming, and then Montana, and then cross over that way. And the reason you do that is because Utah and Nevada, you would be going through the desert. And so you can go that way, but it's very, very tough because the services are extremely far apart. And if you're going in the summer, you have to plan your water incredibly carefully, and it can be a big problem. And so that is why we didn't choose to go across the desert. But this is the more traditional, and the advantages of taking the classic route. It's longer for sure, it adds mileage, but you end up going up through Wyoming, which includes Yellowstone and Grand Tetons, and they're absolutely beautiful. And for sure, I mean, Yellowstone's an enormous park, and so it's really great to see it on a bike. It's just the right pace. but there are real bears out there. And so you absolutely have to be bear boxing your food or bear bagging it if you're not right in the park, because we saw bears, none near our campsite actually, but when you're just out on the roads. And so that is another consideration that you should be aware of if you're going through. Yeah, and then after you get through there, you drop into another tourist trap. You go to Jackson Hole. And so right at this point in the trip, we ended up some big fight about probably tourist traps. And we ended up splitting up and deciding that we were going to meet in Baker City, Oregon. And try to, yeah, just like take some time off. And so this is me and Kyle like eating barbecue in Jackson Hole. And then you go through Missoula in Montana. And so Missoula is the home of adventure cycling. And so they have one, it's like this great hippie town. It has the farmers market, this university town. We ended up staying with this woman whose husband was the boyfriend was a cycle tourist. And so he said, oh yeah, go and stay with my girlfriend. I'm not going to be there. I think he was some Knowles instructor. And so these backcountry trips, and he wasn't there, and he just like signed us up to stay over with his girlfriend. Anyway, she took us to the farmers market and like tubing down the river there. And it was a really great town. I'm sure it's incredibly cold in the winter, but in the summer it was amazing. And you can go into adventure cycling, and they take your picture, and you get some food and stuff like that. And so it's yeah, if you're doing it alone and you want to meet more cyclists, I think that this is a good way to go. And then certainly there are people kind of roving around adventure cycling within Missoula. And this is classic flat moment. And then Idaho, it's really beautiful going through the Salmon River, and then you go through Lolo Pass, and then we ended up meeting up with our buddies again in Baker City. It's good to have some time off and then to see them again. And then by the time you get to Oregon, I mean, Oregon's a very long state. You end up going over this amazing Mackenzie's Pass, and it's like all this lava rock. Yeah, look at these boys. This is amazing. But Oregon, you feel like you're going in through the home stretch. And so you already feel really nostalgic about the trip you haven't even finished. And we stayed in Eugene, which is a really big city along, for the route with some of John's friends. And it's a great city with like lots of bike paths. And so that was a nice stop for us. And then this is us at the very end in Florence, Oregon, having repaired our relationship. And we said goodbye to John and Stern, and they flew back east. And then Kyle and I, we continued down to LA. This is, gorgeous portion of California, but I mean, really, the Oregon coastline is really pretty. It's actually reminiscent of the UK and kind of this like chiseled rock. And then Humboldt County has its own flavor. There are lots of farms in Northern California, avocados. And then you go through Marin County, and then you go over the Golden Gate Bridge if you're taking Route 1 down. And so that feels very like a milestone moment. We hung out in El Cerrito for a couple days, waiting for a friend to come and meet us, and then we continued down to LA along Big Sur. There's Pismo Beach and Carmel. So it was amazing trip. And so here's more of the practicals. yeah, if you're going to do it, guns are real, don't trespass. I mean, you sometimes have to just wild camp, but I would, yeah, just really, yeah, watch out when you're there for sure. And then the services are very limited when you go through the desert, and it's not very predictable, and sometimes things on the map are just, are no longer there. And I would plan the weather, plan when to start and stop because of the weather. But I liked going east to west, even though a lot of people say it's better to go west to east. And then the gear list, it's kind of, kind of funny because maybe much has moved on, but I had a lug steel Bianchi, and then Kyle hand built my wheels. And I actually still ride that bike today. I mean, I know that, I like a really heavy bike for touring. We don't go as fast, but it's really, I've never had any problems with it, but it's a bit embarrassing. I'm still on the same 20 years later. And then we had a 2-man Eureka tent, and these are the classic Boy Scout tents in America. It's a great tent. It's a little bit tight to sleep with your ex, but it worked out well. And I think overall it was less weight than taking 2 1-man tents. We had the Campmore sleeping bags. We bought the sleeping bags that would zip together because we were, originally going as a couple, but did not need those. We had a cocoon. We used a Whisper Light International. I had a full body Thermarest, which is silly. Now I only do 3/4 lengths, and they're very small. The Zephyr headlamp, Nokia phone, no smartphone then, but yeah, we were still using, no problem, because we had the ATM, and then we used a book and the adventure cycling maps. And then this is us, towards the end of the trip, and I just saw these pictures, and I just see these little 20-year-old boys that were wild and rough and sassy, and just always snapping back, and just like fully ripe with youth. And now they're 40-year-old men with, I think 2 of them have gone on to be doctors, and I don't know them as, upstanding adults and fathers, and I just know them as these idiots. And I think it's really fun to think about. You just had these snapshots of people in your mind as captured as a moment in time when you're in your youth. And so I have another Jack Kerouac quote to leave you with. What is that feeling when you're driving away from people and they recede on the plane till you see their specks dispersing? It's the 2 huge world vaulting us, and it's goodbye. And every time you go traveling, you meet all these weird, wacky, wonderful people, and you just sort of wave goodbye, and they just sort of fade away, out of the horizon line and out of your memory. And and it's wonderful to think that we all like interact as humans and pass each other like ships, and just see these beautiful human moments. And have that with people. Anyway, that is my talk. I'm Lisa Lucas, and I write a blog called The Distance to Travel, all about family adventures and traveling.
Lisa, thank you so much. That was ace. It was a really enjoyable story in itself, and seeing the pictures and hearing about the trip. But it really felt like and I'm sure others would agree, I was reliving it with you. I felt nostalgic for you, so that added a really nice flavor through the talk. And it was a good mix of sort of familiar things, which I'm sure lots of people will recognize, like the hospitality and the weird, wonderful wild camps and the badly timed flats, but then also some things you don't normally come across, well, at least from a British perspective, tornadoes and lava and guns and things like that. So just a reminder that it's, even though the US, like you say, does feel very familiar to the rest of the world from media and culture, it's still an exotic, interesting place. I thought the route looked great, actually. It looked really varied. Again, as you'd expect, but often forget with America, it's a big old place, and it's you've got a lot of landscapes on the way, and then little things like the parks where you could camp. I think often at the end of the day, a picnic bench and a shelter is just a game changer after a day of riding. So that's really good, and I think the bit of history to the Bikecentennial, which is an excellent pun, by the way. I think that adds a little something to it. And then the final thing I couldn't let that slide was your reference to remembering people by their legs, and I'd never put my finger on that before, but it's absolutely true. You can, the people I ride with, and certainly my wife, can absolutely picture the calves from behind. That is so true. So I've got a couple of questions, some of my own and some coming thick and fast on the Q&A. But just, I'm curious. It was clearly you're really nostalgic about it. But I'm wondering, have you done much cycling since? And if so, has your tour style changed over the years?
Yeah, I've done a lot of touring. I've never done the around the world trip, but I've done little sections, mostly in Europe. And so I did the Land's End, the John O'Groats, and all kinds of pieces across Europe. And yeah, I've never done another trip where I actually was on any sort of route. I do just love having the map and kind of like planning, but you do end up getting all muddled around. Yeah, so I think that I would love to think that my style hasn't changed, but I think that you never get to do anything again like you would have done when you were like 22. And I think now traveling with kids, you have this extra layer of thinking about, okay, how safe is this? Where when you're 22, you're like, whatever, I'm just sleeping on this picnic bench. Who cares? Okay, I'm just gonna like get in this town pool. I'm sure they won't mind. You like make lots of impulsive, reckless decisions that you can see are reckless now, and yeah, good that nothing bad came of it. But you also kind of miss that sense of screw it, I'm just going to do it. Yeah, where since then, especially having kids, we went across the south of France with a 1 and 3 year old. There's this layer of like, oh God, they're screaming, it's really hot. Okay, at what point am I being like an irresponsible parent around this? So I think that layer is interesting. I mean, when I did John O'Groat, Lenz and the John O'Groats, it was more of a free form trip. And so, yeah, but you never get to be 20 again. I think that is my answer to that.
Oh yeah, that's good. That's interesting. And I love the fact that you've done Land's End, John O'Groats. You crossed the UK as well. When did you do that, and how did you find that?
I did it in 2011. I actually did it over the royal wedding. So there were like lots of days off. And so we did it in 2 weeks, and we had to go through Hereford because the guy I did it with, his brother lived there. And so we just sort of fought it out, but we're like, we have 3 days to get from Land's End to Hereford because scheduling and Easter and things like that. And yeah, so it's 2011, and we got great weather all across Scotland. I'm like, why are more people not going to Scotland? This is amazing. It never rains here. And I went out to, what is the island? Oh gosh, anyway, I love the UK, and I found it absolutely magical to go on a ride, but incredibly different. I mean, just the whole vibe of like going across, this country you supposedly know because you have the passport from the country, when you're going across America, but surprises you in all kinds of ways. And then the UK, I mean, the UK is just teeming with all these like unexpected little beautiful places that nobody seems to talk about, and they're all like these gems. And I think that that reinforced my perspective of the UK as this dreamy little place that no one talks about, these like little towns that don't happen to be tourist towns, but like are like these picturesque little places that if you lived anywhere else, you would just feel honored to go to.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I'm sure lots of countries are the same. It does feel like you get lots of these little hidden gems, and perhaps because it's quite densely populated, you don't have to travel far between one place to the next to find somewhere really interesting that's not far from a popular tourist site, but it gets ignored because it's next to a more popular neighbor, but it's beautiful, and that's all the better for it. How have you found the riding experience from between the US and the UK? Is one better than the other, or things are different about them?
I mean, the US, you have these giant roads, but you can't, maybe some people are cycling on the big highways, but really, I think that we were always trying to find ways around that. I mean, Route 1 was, you had to be on Route 1 for some of it, and it's incredibly dangerous. But there are lots of pockets where even though this route is mapped out, you're still going on these giant highways. Some of them it's illegal to go on, but there are pockets you have to go on. And yeah, I mean, but I think that in either country, you're always trying to escape and find, those roads that, have hardly any cars. Yeah, so they're huge roads there. But I don't know. I mean, I felt like it was harder to predict what we were gonna have happening, like up through Scotland. But yeah, I mean, both places we ended up on these giant roads, and you're always trying to get the tiny ones. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, even though America is known for giant roads, and here, I live on the outskirts of London, and it's, these tiny little, you're always trying to, find the low traffic, straight, direct, roads, regardless of where you are. And so I think you just try to, that's always the holy grail that you're keeping, it's kind of the North Star for when you're trying to find the route. What do you find?
Well, I was just talking to Lisa before the start of the webinar, and not only does Lisa live just around the corner from where I grew up, but some of you may know that my wife and I, we cycled across the US, admittedly a very different route right down south on near the southern border. And I think, in truth, I could talk about the differences, but I think what you described, Lisa, is pretty much the same, in that almost anywhere in the world, you're always searching for that dream road that's perfectly smooth with no cars on it, that's flat the whole time, but somehow gets you to the top of a mountain for some nice views. And it's just always a balance. Sometimes you get those real gems, but they end up being like real slogs uphill, and other times you're in a hurry and you end up on a big road, and whether it's a highway only on the shoulder, or it's just a British A road where you're just praying every time a car comes past. It's just part and parcel of the highs and lows of cycle touring, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, there was actually just a question, because we mentioned hills, the Rockies and the Ozarks. What someone's just asked about the steepness of them. Are they all manageable, or are we talking get off and push, or a bit of both?
Well, okay, so the Rockies, we didn't have any problems. You just throw it in a low gear and you wait. Don't go too quick. I mean, definitely let yourself acclimatize. So make sure that you're planning when you're going through there. The altitude is much higher, but yeah, I mean, the Appalachians, especially, even more so than the Ozarks, were really steep. And certainly on our first night, we just got a late start. The very first night, we ended up having to go down this giant steep hill and camp directly at the bottom. And the next morning, we were pushing our giant bikes up. This is our first night, and we're like, wow, we've really failed here. So we did have that problem. There were not a lot of points where we were actually pushing, but that was a fail in choosing the camp site location on the first day. But the actually Kyle hurt his knees as we were going through Virginia and into Kentucky. We ended up having, or we didn't stay. We stayed in 2 motels, but yeah, there was this really dank motel in Eastern Kentucky that we ended up in, and he was just popping the ibuprofen, icing his leg, and I'm like just like washing out our clothes and the hotel sink and putting up. I'm like, I don't know if we're going to be able to go on if his knees are really shot, because we were a little bit too ambitious on going through the Appalachians. Then maybe that's it. Maybe we won't continue. But he just kept on a heavy diet of ibuprofen, and we ended up being able to ride it off. But yeah, certainly he had a really wasn't like a long-term injury, but it really affected and impacted the days in the early part of our trip. And so I always think just try to like take as little as possible, for sure. Probably took too much. Our friend John was always like, what can we ditch? He just like put everything from his pack out on the ground, and he'd be like, okay, what are we going to ditch? We have to get rid of stuff. So I just think take as little as possible, get rid of as much as you can. And then I think don't hurt yourself. And so I don't think that you really need to push, but my ego is not too big to actually just get up and do it rather than getting hurt. I have all these knee problems, and I've had lots of knee surgeries anyway. But yeah, I would definitely say that the whole route is planned in a way that anyone can do it. I would say that you don't need to you don't need to train. You just get on the bike and you just start training by doing that. You see a lot, because of the way America works, you see a lot of kind of kids, in their early 20s doing it. And then you see a lot of retirees doing it, because those are the two people, the two types of people that aren't in these like, in their jobs where you have to have your health care, like match up. Those are the only people that have a long enough break to, to be able to do it. And so I would say it's not like too difficult a trip. And actually, if you're looking for a big, like either starter adventure or something that's not, that's not too crazy, because of the maps on this trip, I would say this can be a total feel good, let's see America trip.
Great. Yeah, that's I think I definitely second the sort of the message about not necessarily needing to train. If you're a bit of a cyclist already and you're doing a long trip like this and you're not trying to set a record, then yeah, you'll by the end of it, you're going to be pretty damn fit, and you also don't need to be on day one. And I think that sort of bifurcation in ages, with you've got the young, the 20 somethings and the sort of more retirement end, that often plays out at the festival. Obviously we've got the whole spectrum, but definitely some sort of bigger catchment from those age groups. You mentioned you're having 2 girls. There's a question about whether your kids enjoy the cycle touring. I mentioned you mentioned them screaming and you feel like a bad parent, and I've definitely had that pretty much every time I've been on a bike. But then I always think chances are if I was at home, there'd be some screaming fits as well, so might as well have a bit of bike time. So yeah, do your kids enjoy it? And then also there's another question, when they're older, how would you feel about them doing this route? Would you encourage it? Would you be nervous or what?
Okay, so I guess second part of the question first. And so I think my project is to make them independent. And so I feel like by the time they could do this, that my job is to train them to be as confident as possible and street smart as possible. And so they absolutely could do a trip like this. And if they couldn't, then I would feel like shame on me, that I wouldn't feel confident for them going. So I think that is part of what I'm always thinking about the project of raising kids so they can go out into the world. And as far as the first part of the question, I mean, I think it comes down to the type of kids you have. Certainly, they all have their own personalities, and we actually live in the outskirts of London, but we choose not to have a car. Like, I love cycling and I love walking, and we live in a location you can kind of do that. And so they are just attuned to us, like, oh yeah, we're going to bike there. And so we would always have them in a trailer when they were too small to go around. So they're used to that way of getting around. And so we did this longer trip across the south of France, and certainly it was a really, really hot summer. And so that was tricky, but I think that they loved it. They loved the camping because we've done it. They're just used to it now. And then, but there's that leap into, okay, so we can drag them along and haul them across the south of France. But then when they have to start, doing it on their own steam, how do you do that? And I want to write a book about this because I am right in that project where my kids, we're always cycling like up to Richmond or over to Hampton Court Palace. And so they can really do the endurance, especially the younger one, the 5-year-old, just seems to naturally be up for it. But they both, maybe because we've exposed them a lot, or maybe because they're just, I don't know, predisposed in some way, they both are up for it. So they're not saying, I hate this. So we're lucky in that way. But I have a blog about this. I can send it somewhere, because I think that for lots of families, you're thinking, how do I just take those steps necessary to like kind of get them used to this? And so we went to Ile de Ré this summer and went camping. And in Ile de Ré, they have like 110 miles or kilometers of bike trails. And so we rented bikes there, and we're able to do like 25 mile days with my 4-year-old. And actually we're only stopped because of the heat. She was okay on the mileage. And so that was a really good starter trip where you don't have to interact with many cars, and you're able to just say, okay, we're going to go to lunch up here on the map. And so it's like this good first step into cycle touring. And so they get used to it, like going the distance, even when they're tired, and having that, oh yeah, we're getting lunch there, or ice cream there. And so I think that they have that in mind. And so the next trip is going to be in, I used to live in Amsterdam for a while. And so in the Netherlands, where you also can, go all over just on these bike trails. And so thinking about the types of trips that you can kind of push their endurance and also are like easy and fun in certain ways. I think that is the way to get kids that are already up for it, building their endurance and understanding what that is, like what it is to go on a bike tour.
Yeah, I can believe that. It sounds very sensible. Ours are a couple of years behind yours, but not too far, and especially relate to that sort of discovery of how do I do this when this age, how does that work? And people must go through it before, but you just feel like you're having to discover it yourself and go through it with them. Listen, I'm conscious of time. There are two more questions I just fire at you. I think at least one of them is probably quite quick fire. So the first one is, did you have any bother with dogs, and if so, how did you deal with it? And then the final one, which might be a nice one to finish on, is just, would you do it again?
Oh yeah, okay. So dogs, are really bad packs of dogs in Eastern Kentucky. I mean, it is a really vicious area, and we tried to just outcycle them. We didn't have any that actually attacked us, and so I think that's only down to luck. I'm sure lots of people have these dogs attack them because, I don't know, it's inescapable. And you don't know, they just like come out of nowhere. It's just luck if you're like far enough ahead, or if they're just not that fast. So yes, no, I didn't highlight that, but man, Eastern Kentucky, rough area for us. Maybe it's changed. And then would I do this again? I mean, in a heartbeat. I mean, it's really hard to get this amount of time. It's 3 months. I would probably go other places first. What I would love to do is do a, I don't know, like I'm 50 or 60, have my kids like gone off on their own adventure. And I think it would be so amazing actually to get my husband and like all the guys I went with, if their partners want to come, we could just like all go again together. I think that would be really fun and amazing. But yeah, no, for sure, I would love to do it again in kind of a different context, like like a much older version of myself.
Yeah, for sure. I can relate to that. Sort of relive it again, and some of it would be just the same, and some of it would be very different, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Listen, Lisa, that was really, really good. Thank you for giving us your time and sharing all your memories with us. It's got me already thinking about crossing the states again on a bike, which is no bad thing. Listen, I'm just going to tell to everyone else listening, thank you very much for joining us today. There's 4 more talks left of the festival. We've got some Lyon to Milan, 5 o'clock this afternoon. We've got Timmy Mallet talking about cycling around the coast of Britain at 8 this evening. And then tomorrow I'm hosting again at 5 o'clock. Some guys who spelled out a message for refugees in GPS track of their route. Very, very elaborate. Looking forward to hearing that. And then the closing talk tomorrow at 8 about cycling east around the world at 60. That one sounds fascinating. So Lisa, that was brilliant. Thank you very, very much. And thank you everyone else for joining, and hopefully see you at another talk again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.